Kang Min-ho's phone buzzed for the 5th time in 2 minutes, and he silenced it without looking, sprinting past the sliding glass doors of Seoul's most prestigious private hospital. His tie was loose, his jacket half off one shoulder, and his mind was a storm of panic he hadn't felt in years. His fiancée had collapsed. That was all the message said. Seo Yuna, collapsed. Charity gala. Ambulance. Room 714, his assistant had texted, breathless, already ahead of him somewhere in the building. 7th floor, East Wing. Min-ho's shoes slapped against polished marble as he took the stairs 2 at a time, ignoring the elevator, ignoring the nurse who called after him to slow down. His phone rang again. His mother, this time, and then his lawyer. Something about a $1 billion acquisition closing at midnight, and he silenced both without breaking stride. He reached the 7th floor, gasping, chest heaving, eyes scanning door numbers in a blur. 710, 711, 712. He turned the corner too fast, caught the number on the next door, 713, and, distracted, exhausted, certain in his bones that this was it, he pushed it open. He froze. The room was dim, lit only by the soft glow of a bedside lamp. A woman sat in a chair beside the hospital bed, her head bowed over a small sleeping boy tucked beneath white blankets. She looked up at the sound of the door. Min-ho's entire body went cold. "Amara," he whispered. She stared at him as if he were a ghost, her lips parted, but no sound came out. 5 years. 5 years since he had last seen that face. The face that used to look at him with love, before it looked at him with betrayal, before it disappeared from his life entirely. Min-ho, she finally breathed, and even his name in her mouth sounded like an accusation. Neither of them moved. Neither of them spoke. The air between them was thick enough to choke on. Then the little boy stirred. He rubbed his eyes with small fists and blinked up at the stranger in the doorway. He couldn't have been more than 5 years old, his skin a warm brown, his eyes wide and curious, and Min-ho's stomach lurched, strangely, achingly familiar. "Mom," the boy mumbled sleepily. "Who's that man?" Amara's hand found her son's shoulder instantly, protectively. She didn't take her eyes off Min-ho. "Someone from my past," she said quietly. The words hit Min-ho like a physical blow. He opened his mouth to say something. Anything. But nothing came. He took one last look at the boy's face, at the shape of his eyes, at the small dimple in his left cheek that seemed to mirror something in Min-ho's own childhood photographs, and then he turned and walked out. He didn't stop walking until he reached room 714, where Seo Yuna lay in a hospital bed, pale but conscious, a nurse checking her blood pressure. She looked up at him and reached for his hand. "Min-ho," she said weakly. "You came." "Of course I came," he said, but his voice sounded far away even to himself. His mind was 3 doors down, locked on a small, sleeping face he could not stop seeing. That night, Min-ho did not sleep. He sat alone in his penthouse, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking a city that had made him one of its richest men, and stared at nothing. His phone lit up with messages about the acquisition, about wedding seating charts, about his mother's demands for a larger guest list. He answered none of them. All he could think about was the boy's smile, the boy's eyes. Something about the shape of his face that felt like looking into a mirror turned back through time. He told himself it was a coincidence. Children looked like all sorts of people. He told himself Amara Johnson had left him 5 years ago, had betrayed him, had vanished from his life with barely an explanation, and that whatever life she had built since then was none of his concern. He told himself a lot of things that night. He believed almost none of them. By morning, he had made a decision. He called his assistant, Mr. Cho, into his office before the sun had fully risen. "I need you to find out everything about a woman named Amara Johnson," Min-ho said, his voice carefully flat. "She's staying in room 713 at Cheongdam General. I want to know why she's back in Korea, how long she's been here, and everything about the boy with her." Mr. Cho hesitated. Sir, isn't that— Just do it, Min-ho snapped, harder than he intended. He softened, exhaling. Please. Quietly. By that evening, the report was on his desk. Amara Johnson, 34 years old, returned to Seoul 8 months ago after years working abroad, first in the United States, then briefly in Ghana. No record of remarriage. One son, Ethan Johnson, age 5. Min-ho's hands began to shake as he read the boy's birth date. 5 years old. Born 7 months after the divorce was finalized. He sat back in his chair, his breath coming fast and shallow, doing the math over and over, as though the numbers might change if he calculated them enough times. They didn't. He thought back to that final year of his marriage, the year everything had fallen apart. He remembered the photographs that arrived anonymously at his office, grainy images of Amara with another man, an old friend from her university days, taken out of context and designed, he now realized with sickening clarity, to look like exactly what his mother had wanted him to see. He remembered the divorce papers that appeared on his desk 2 weeks later, already signed with what looked like Amara's signature. He remembered calling her, again and again, and getting no answer. He remembered the day he learned she had left the country entirely, and how he had told himself that her silence was confirmation of her guilt. He had never once considered that the signature might have been forged, that the photographs might have been staged, that the silence might have been the silence of a woman who believed, with equal and devastating certainty, that he was the one who had thrown her away. I need to see her again, he murmured to the empty office. Over the following week, Min-ho found reasons to return to the hospital. He told himself it was for Yuna. She was still recovering, still weak from whatever had caused her collapse. But every visit, his feet carried him past room 713 first. He saw Amara in the cafeteria one afternoon, sitting alone with a cup of coffee she wasn't drinking, staring out the window. He sat 2 tables away, pretending to read something on his phone, stealing glances he couldn't stop himself from taking. He saw her again outside the pharmacy, Ethan's small hand in hers, the boy chattering about a cartoon he'd watched that morning. Min-ho lingered by the vending machines, longer than any purchase required. On the 4th encounter, in the parking garage, Amara finally confronted him. "Are you following me?" she demanded, her voice sharp. Ethan tucked slightly behind her leg. "No," Min-ho said, though the lie tasted bitter. My fiancé is a patient here. I didn't expect to see you." 4 times, Min-ho. "Coincidence," he said, though neither of them believed it. Amara's jaw tightened. 5 years of anger sat just beneath her skin, and he could see it threatening to surface. "You have some nerve," she said quietly, careful to keep her voice low so Ethan wouldn't hear the edge in it. "You destroyed everything. And now you want to what? Make small talk in a parking garage?" "I didn't destroy anything," Min-ho said, and for the first time, real emotion cracked through his careful composure. "You left, Amara. You disappeared. I left because you stopped answering my calls the moment those photographs showed up," she snapped. "Because divorce papers appeared with my name on them that I never signed. Because I went to your office, and your mother told me, to my face, that you never wanted to see me again." Min-ho went very still. "My mother told you that?" "Don't pretend you didn't know," Amara said, but something in his expression made her pause. For just a moment, the anger flickered, replaced by uncertainty. Ethan tugged on her sleeve. "Mom, can we go now? I'm hungry." Amara looked down at her son, and something in her softened instantly, the way it always did. "Yes, baby. Let's go." She turned to leave, and Min-ho, without thinking, called after her. "Ethan, that's a nice name." Ethan turned back, unafraid, curious in the way only small children could be around strangers. "Do you have kids?" he asked. "No," Min-ho said, his throat tight. "That's okay," Ethan said, with the easy generosity of a 5-year-old. "Maybe someday." Amara pulled him gently by the hand, and they disappeared into the parking garage, leaving Min-ho standing alone beneath the fluorescent lights, his heart hammering against his ribs. The days that followed were a slow unraveling. Minho found himself watching Ethan whenever their paths crossed, the way the boy laughed with his whole body, head thrown back. The way he refused vegetables but devoured spicy food far beyond what most children could handle. The way he held a crayon in his left hand and drew with quick, confident strokes that looked uncannily like Minho's own childhood sketches, still packed away in a box at his mother's house. Even the hospital staff began to notice. "He looks just like you know?" one of the nurses said one afternoon, not unkindly, simply making conversation as she updated Yuna's chart. The little boy in 713. Same eyes. Same laugh, even. Minho said nothing, but the words lodged themselves deep in his chest and would not leave. Yuna noticed his distraction long before he was ready to admit it existed. She had always been perceptive. It was one of the things that had drawn him to her in the wake of his divorce, her calm, unshakable competence, so different from the chaos of his final year with Amara. But now, as she watched him stare out the hospital window instead of meeting her eyes, she felt something cold settle in her stomach. "You've been strange all week," she said one evening, as he sat beside her bed, scrolling through his phone without really seeing it. "Where do you keep disappearing to?" "Nowhere," he said. "Just work." She studied his face for a long moment. "Is it her?" His hand stilled on the phone. "What?" "Amara Johnson," Yuna said, and the name sounded strange and dangerous in her mouth. "She's here, isn't she? I heard the nurses talking." Minho didn't answer immediately, which was answer enough. "Minho," Yuna said, her voice tightening. "We are getting married in 6 weeks." "I know. Do you?" She sat up straighter despite her weakness, fixing him with a look that demanded honesty. "Because you have not been present with me in days." He wanted to tell her everything. The boy, the eyes, the crayon drawings, the math that wouldn't stop repeating in his head. But something held him back. Some instinct that told him the ground beneath his feet was not yet solid enough to say the words out loud. "I'm sorry," he said instead. "I'll do better." But he didn't stop returning to the 7th floor, and Yuna, unconvinced by his apology, began to watch him more closely than he realized. 3 days later, she followed him. She kept her distance, moving carefully in a borrowed hospital robe and slippers, despite her doctor's orders to rest, until she reached the corner near room 713 and saw him. Saw Minho crouched down at Ethan's height in the hallway, laughing at something the boy had said, his hand resting lightly on the boy's small shoulder, in a gesture so natural, so instinctively paternal, that Yuna's breath caught in her throat. She saw Amara standing a few feet away, arms crossed, watching the exchange with an expression caught somewhere between wariness and something achingly tender. Yuna retreated before any of them saw her, her heart pounding, panic clawing up her spine. She knew. In that instant, watching the 3 of them together, she knew exactly what she was looking at, even if no one had said the word aloud yet. That night, alone in her hospital room, Yuna made a decision that would haunt her later. She said nothing. Not to Minho. Not to anyone. Because 5 years ago, when the forged documents and staged photographs had crossed her desk at Minho's mother's request, Yuna had asked no questions then either. She had not created the lie, but she had known enough to suspect it was a lie, and she had stayed silent because the silence had cleared her path to the man she wanted. She told herself once again that silence was easier than truth. But truth, Minho was discovering, had a way of forcing itself into the light regardless of who wished to keep it buried. He learned, through careful, quiet inquiries, that Amara had never remarried. That she had worked 3 jobs in the early years after leaving Korea, cleaning offices at night and waiting tables during the day, all while raising Ethan alone in a cramped apartment outside Atlanta. that she had eventually built a modest career as a translator, moved to Ghana for 2 years, chasing a better opportunity, and finally returned to Seoul 8 months ago for work that barely covered rent and childcare. Everything he had believed about her, that she had left him for another man, that she had chosen an easier life somewhere else, collapsed piece by piece under the weight of what he was learning. She had not run toward wealth or comfort. She had run, alone, into hardship, and she had endured it without a single word of complaint to anyone who might have helped her, without a single word to him. One evening, unable to sleep, unable to stop the questions circling endlessly in his mind, Minho found himself back at the hospital long after visiting hours had technically ended, using his family's donor status to slip past the front desk unquestioned. He made his way to room 713 and found the door slightly ajar, Amara asleep in the chair beside Ethan's bed, exhaustion finally overtaking her. Minho stood in the doorway and watched the boy sleep, a worn, stuffed bear clutched against his chest, his small face peaceful in a way that made something in Minho's chest ache with a feeling he didn't have a name for yet. Ethan stirred, half waking, his eyes fluttering open just enough to focus blearily on the shape standing in the doorway. "Are you here again?" he mumbled, voice thick with sleep. "I am," Minho whispered. Ethan's small hand tightened around the bear. "I wish Dads didn't disappear," he murmured, so quietly Minho almost missed it, and then his eyes closed again, drifting back into sleep before Minho could respond. Minho stood frozen in the doorway for a long moment, and then he felt something hot slide down his cheek. He wiped it away quickly, ashamed of his own tears, and left before Amara could wake and find him standing there, undone by 5 words spoken by a sleeping child. He could not carry the uncertainty any longer. The next morning, he requested a private meeting with Amara at a quiet cafe 2 blocks from the hospital, away from prying eyes and hospital gossip. She arrived tense, arms crossed, clearly braced for a fight. "What do you want, Minho?" He didn't waste time on pleasantries. "I want a DNA test." Amara's face went through several emotions in rapid succession: shock, anger, and finally something that looked almost like relief, as though she too had been carrying the same unbearable question and simply hadn't dared to voice it first. "You think I'd lie about something like this?" she said, though her voice lacked its earlier fire. "I don't know what to think anymore," Minho admitted, and the honesty in his voice seemed to disarm her more than any accusation could have. "I just need to know the truth. For both of us. For him." Amara was quiet for a long moment, staring down at her untouched coffee. "Fine," she finally said. "A test. But if it comes back negative, you walk away from us completely. No more parking garage confrontations. No more hallway visits. You disappear from our lives entirely." "And if it's positive?" Amara looked up at him, and for the first time in 5 years, Minho saw something other than anger in her eyes. He saw fear. "Then everything changes," she said quietly. "For all of us." The test was arranged quietly, discreetly, through a private lab Minho trusted with his family's most sensitive business dealings. The wait for results stretched 3 agonizing days, during which Minho barely ate, barely slept, and barely spoke to Yuna, who watched him with an expression of quiet, controlled devastation that he was too consumed by his own turmoil to fully register. On the 3rd day, the results arrived in a sealed envelope delivered directly to Minho's office. He opened it with trembling hands. Not the biological father. The words blurred in front of his eyes. He read them again. And again. Something inside him that he hadn't realized had been holding on to hope collapsed entirely. He called Amara immediately, his voice hollow. "It's negative." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. "Negative," Amara repeated, and he could hear something breaking in her voice too. Not relief, as he might have expected. but a strange, bewildered grief, as though some part of her had also been quietly, secretly hoping. Neither of them spoke for a long moment. "I'm sorry," Minho finally said, though he wasn't sure what he was apologizing for anymore. "So am I," Amara whispered, and she hung up. For 2 days, Minho tried to accept the result. He told himself it was a coincidence. The eyes, the laugh, the way Ethan held a crayon. He told himself children resembled all sorts of unrelated people, that his own grief and guilt had manufactured connections that didn't exist. He threw himself back into work, back into wedding preparations, back into the careful, controlled life he had built. But something nagged at him. A detail buried in the lab report he had barely glanced at in his devastation. A note about a processing delay. An unusual footnote about sample handling that his analytical mind, trained by years of scrutinizing contracts and financial statements, could not simply let go. He called the lab. The technician who answered was apologetic, hesitant, clearly uncomfortable with what she had to say. "Mr. Kang, I need to inform you of something. During an internal audit this week, we discovered a labeling error affecting several samples processed on the same day as yours. 2 sample sets appear to have been switched during intake." Minho's hand tightened around the phone. "Switched. We caught it during a routine cross-check. I'm terribly sorry. We'd like to run the test again immediately, at no cost, with additional verification protocols." Minho barely managed to thank her before hanging up, his heart pounding so violently he could feel it in his throat. He called Amara again, his voice shaking. "There was a mistake. The lab made a mistake. They want to retest." This time, the wait was even more unbearable than the first. Amara arrived at the lab with Ethan in tow, her face a careful mask of composure that Minho could see was costing her everything to maintain. They sat in a sterile waiting room together, saying almost nothing, both of them staring at a door that would open with either an ending or a beginning. When the technician finally called them in, Amara's hand found Minho's without either of them quite deciding to reach for the other. He didn't let go. The doctor's expression was unreadable as she reviewed the file, and for a moment, the silence stretched so long, Minho thought he might be sick. "The results are conclusive," she finally said. "Positive. Mr. Kang, you are Ethan's biological father." The room seemed to tilt around him. Amara made a sound that was half sob, half laugh, her free hand flying to her mouth. Minho could not speak at all. 5 years. 5 years of a son he had never known existed, growing up without him in cramped apartments and borrowed clothes, and nights when his mother had gone hungry so he wouldn't have to. 5 years, he finally managed, his voice breaking entirely. "Amara, I'm so sorry. I didn't know. I swear to you, I didn't know." "I know," Amara whispered, tears streaming freely now. "I know you didn't." Outside the examination room, unseen, Ethan sat in the waiting area with a hospital volunteer, swinging his legs and drawing a picture of a superhero with a cape, entirely unaware that the results of a piece of paper in the next room had just rewritten the entire shape of his small life. The truth, once it began to surface, did not stop there. Minho hired an independent investigator, someone with no ties to his family, and within a week, the full architecture of the deception 5 years earlier came into focus with sickening clarity. The anonymous photographs had been staged by a private detective, paid in cash from an account traced back to Minho's mother. The forged divorce documents had been created by a document specialist with a history of similar work for wealthy families seeking discreet solutions to inconvenient marriages. Amara's signature had been expertly copied from an old employment contract. And at the center of it all, orchestrating every detail with cold, methodical precision, was Minho's mother, who had never accepted her son's marriage to a woman she considered beneath the family name. A foreign woman, a black woman, someone she believed would disgrace generations of careful reputation building. When Minho confronted her, his mother did not deny it. She sat in her sitting room, teacup in hand, entirely unrepentant. "I did what was necessary," she said calmly. "You would have thanked me eventually." "You destroyed my life," Minho said, his voice shaking with a rage he had never directed at her before. "You destroyed hers. You kept a grandson from me for 5 years." "I protected this family," she replied, unmoved. "I would do it again." He walked out of her house that day and did not speak to her again for a long time. Seo Yuna's role in the deception, when it finally surfaced, proved more complicated. She had not fabricated the evidence herself, had not paid the private detective, or forged the signature. But the investigation revealed that she had known, in the months following the divorce, that questions had been raised about the authenticity of the photographs. She had heard whispers. She had chosen not to ask further questions, because doing so might have unraveled the opportunity that Amara's absence had opened up for her. When Minho confronted her with what he knew, Yuna did not try to deny her silence. "I didn't create the lie," she said quietly, sitting very still in her hospital bed, her wedding just 5 weeks away. "But I let it stand, because I wanted you. I told myself it didn't matter how I got you, only that I did." "It mattered," Minho said, and the quiet devastation in his voice was worse than any shout could have been. "It mattered to a woman who lost 5 years of her son's childhood. It mattered to a boy who grew up believing his father simply didn't want him." Yuna had no response to that. There wasn't one to give. The wedding invitations had already gone out. The ballroom at one of Seoul's most luxurious hotels had already been booked, decorated in white orchids and gold accents, befitting the union of two of the country's most prominent families. Reporters had already been briefed on the guest list, eager for photographs of the season's most anticipated society wedding. On the morning of the ceremony, Minho stood at the altar in a tailored black suit, watching 400 guests settle into their seats, watching cameras flash from the back of the ballroom, watching his mother beam with the satisfaction of a woman who believed her carefully constructed plan had finally, fully succeeded. The doors at the back of the ballroom opened. Seo Yuna appeared in a cascade of white silk, radiant, composed, walking toward him down an aisle scattered with white petals. Minho watched her approach, and in her face he saw not malice, but the quiet resignation of a woman who had made her choices and was prepared to live with them. He thought of Ethan's small voice in the dark hospital room. "I wish dads didn't disappear." He thought of Amara, alone for 5 years, working 3 jobs, raising their son without a single word of support from the man who should have been standing beside her. He thought of his own life, the penthouse, the company, the wealth, all of it built on a foundation of lies he had unknowingly inherited and was now being asked to marry into permanently. When Yuna reached the altar and extended her hand toward his, Minho did not take it. The ballroom fell into stunned silence. "I can't do this," he said quietly, his voice carrying further than he intended in the sudden hush. "I'm sorry, Yuna. I truly am. But I can't do this." He didn't shout. He didn't make a scene beyond those 7 words. He simply turned, walked back down the aisle past 400 shocked faces, past his mother's furious expression, past the flashing cameras that would make the moment national news by evening, and walked out of the ballroom into the gray afternoon light. He drove straight to the hospital, still in his wedding suit, and found Amara in room 713, packing Ethan's small bag in preparation for their discharge later that day, his treatment for a minor respiratory illness finally complete. She looked up, startled by his appearance, still dressed for a wedding that was, by then, unraveling into scandal and gossip across the city. "Minho, what are you doing here? Aren't you supposed to be?" "I couldn't marry her," he said simply. "Not with everything I know now. Not while you and Ethan were living without me, thinking I never wanted you." He reached into his jacket and pulled out a folder, copies of the forged divorce documents, the fabricated evidence, everything the investigator had uncovered, and placed it gently on the bedside table. "I never signed these," he said. "I never wanted a divorce, Amara. I want you to know the truth, all of it, even if it's 5 years too late." Amara stared down at the documents, her hands trembling as she turned the pages, seeing in black and white the full scope of the lie that had shaped half a decade of her life. Years of pain, of loneliness, of believing she had been abandoned by a man who had simply stopped loving her, suddenly reorganized themselves into a different, more painful shape. Not abandonment, but theft. Something had been stolen from both of them. 5 years, she whispered, tears sliding silently down her face. "I know," Minho said, his own voice breaking. "I know I can't get them back. I'm not asking you to forgive me today, or even this year. I'm asking for the chance to try, to be there for Ethan, to be there for you, if you'll let me, in whatever way you're willing to have me." Ethan, who had been quietly watching the exchange from his hospital bed, tilted his head curiously. "Mom, are you sad or happy crying?" Amara let out a broken laugh through her tears, wiping her face with the back of her hand. "I don't know yet, baby," she said softly. "Maybe both." She looked up at Minho, and for a long moment, neither of them said anything at all. 5 years of grief and anger and misunderstanding hung in the space between them, too heavy to resolve in a single conversation. "I'm not promising anything," Amara finally said. "Not today. You have a lot to prove, Minho, to me and especially to him." "I know," Minho said. "I'll prove it, however long it takes." It did take time, months of it. Minho did not try to buy his way into Ethan's life with expensive gifts or grand gestures, though it would have been easy for a man of his wealth to do so. Instead, he showed up. He attended Ethan's soccer practices on Saturday mornings, standing on the sidelines with the other parents, cheering loudly and awkwardly for a boy who was slowly, cautiously learning to call him something other than that man. He learned Ethan's bedtime routine, the specific way the stuffed bear had to be positioned, the 3 books that had to be read in the exact same order every night, the small nightlight that had to stay on until Ethan was fully asleep. He helped with homework, sitting at Amara's small kitchen table long after his office had emptied for the evening, patiently working through simple math problems with a boy who was, he was slowly discovering, sharp and funny and endlessly curious in ways that reminded him painfully of the childhood he himself had never gotten to fully enjoy. His mother did not easily accept any of it. She raged. She threatened to cut him off from the company entirely. She refused for months to acknowledge Ethan's existence at all. But Minho, for the first time in his adult life, did not bend to her demands. He restructured his role at the company, stepped back from the parts of the business most closely tied to her influence, and made it unmistakably clear that his son wasn't negotiable. Amara watched all of it unfold slowly, carefully, guarding her heart the way 5 years of hardship had taught her to. She did not let him back in easily. There were setbacks, moments when old anger resurfaced, arguments about missed history that could never fully be recovered, nights when she looked at him and saw only the man who had failed to find her, however unknowingly, for half a decade. But consistency, she discovered, was different from grand promises. Consistency showed up even on the hard days. Consistency didn't disappear when things got difficult. Slowly, month by month, she allowed him back into their lives. Not because he was rich, not because of the company or the penthouse or anything money could offer, but because he simply, quietly, kept showing up. A year later, Minho walked through the same hospital corridor where it had all begun, holding a small bouquet of flowers, his heart pounding with an entirely different kind of nervous energy. This time, he checked the room number carefully, twice, before knocking gently on the door. Inside, Amara sat up in the hospital bed, exhausted, but glowing, cradling a newborn girl wrapped in a soft pink blanket, Ethan, now 6, sat beside her on the bed, peering curiously at his new baby sister with an expression of fierce protective pride. "So," Amara said, smiling despite her exhaustion, "you're sure you're in the right room this time?" Minho crossed the room, kissed her forehead gently, and looked down at his daughter's tiny, sleeping face, then at his son, beaming up at him, then at the woman who had somehow, against every unlikely odd, given him a second chance he knew he didn't fully deserve, but would spend the rest of his life trying to earn. "I'll never walk into the wrong one again," he said quietly. Outside the window, Seoul's skyline stretched into the evening light, indifferent to the quiet miracle unfolding in room 713, a family rebuilt not through wealth or power, but through the simple, stubborn choice to keep showing up, one ordinary day at a time. If this story moved you, don't scroll past without hitting that like button. It genuinely helps this channel grow. Drop a comment below and let us know which moment hit you hardest: the wrong door, the DNA twist, or Minho walking away from his own wedding. And if you love stories like this one, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss the next one. Thank you for watching until the very end. See you in the next story.